Welcome, I'm Catherine Magaña here with Steve Wolff, Rachel Ivanovich, and Greg Carroll. And we're here to talk about retirement planning mistakes. Over the years, we've met with many clients, and there's a few mistakes that stand out to us that we wanted to share with you. And one of them is underestimating the cost and length of retirement. And so if you're not factoring in inflation, that's a big deal. When we look at financial plans and retirement plans, we look at what are your income needs in today's dollars, and we also factor in inflation, because inflation is real and it's something we really need to account for. Over the years, we've seen low inflation, and then it went high, and now we're kind of at a midpoint. But that is definitely something that needs to be factored in when you look at your lifestyle and your living expenses.
Nobody wants to run out of money, that's for sure. And I think that probably, besides your health, I think running out of money is probably the second biggest fear. Although, I saw something recently. What are your biggest fears in life? And you know what number one was? Public speaking.
Really?
Are you kidding
That
me?
was the number one fear. It wasn't death. It was,
Getting up in front of a room.
Getting up in front of people and talking was the number one fear.
Interesting.
Kind of interesting.
Where was death?
It was number two.
Oh, number two.
Yeah, but I think it's funny that it was ahead of death. Not afraid to die, but I am afraid to speak.
It'll kill me if I have to get up and speak in front of people.
So as we think about income, there's Social Security income, there's pension, there's investment income. And when you factor that in, as you're looking at your mix of investments, you do need to factor in those other income sources you have coming in. Do you have real estate? What's the income? And so, because as we get it phased into retirement, we have this conversation all the time, is a lot of people feel like, okay, I need to now be a lot more conservative with my investments. And while the reality is you may shift a little bit with your allocation, but the reality is it's not just how are my investments allocated, it's also what other income sources do you have coming in. Because we're living a lot longer than we used to. And people, we need to have plans that last. And so if you're retiring at 60, 65, or 70, and you're living to 90, 95, or 100, and yes, we've had clients live to over 100. So you have to have enough assets to live on, generate income, and also, you want your money to grow. Or also through the planning process, we look at, what's the objective? Is the goal to leave money to your beneficiaries in your estate, or is your objective to spend all the money and not have anything left? And so there's some, usually, there's some money that wants to be left at the end, but it just depends on each person.
You bring up a good point about when we have financial plans, we're telling people we're planning for you to be here forever, really, not just until a certain time frame. So when we have growth in the portfolio, or we try to get you growth in the portfolio, people say, well, why are you doing that? And I say, well, tell me when you're going to die. If you know that, then I could have a perfect financial plan for you. And what is the joke that I hope someone will tell me where I'm going to die, what city, and I'll never see that city. I'll never go there. But I mean, if we knew when we were going to die, then this would be really easy. But we don't. So, and all this too depends on how much money do you have. I mean, if you've got $1 billion, and I don't think you have to worry. But a lot of people don't even have any money saved at all, and they're going to be living on Social Security. Now, honestly, I mean, of course, those are not our clients, but there's many people who are in between somewhere. So when are you going to die? How much do you have? All that features into it. Are you in good health? Will you need long-term care?
And then there's also times where maybe the husband or wife, there's a age difference. So you also have to plan for, if your spouse is 10 years younger than you are, that means, the money needs to last a little longer, especially if you're both retired.
Or maybe one spouse has a pension that would go away if the other spouse passes away. I've seen that many times.
Oh, yeah.
You're right. And a lot of people are depending on Social Security. And the way things are going now, Social Security will run out of money as it is right now. I'm not saying that won't get fixed. But if it does run out, then the amount of money that you're going to receive from Social Security will be decreased, if the math turns out right, by about 25%. So if that's the only thing that you're getting for retirement, or if it's a major part of it, you have to be a little concerned about that.
I've had clients also that were very surprised about Medicare, that Medicare didn't cover everything, such as glasses and some sorts of dental care, and that maybe they would need a supplemental plan on top of that. So that's definitely something that needs to be, factored in as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of the, inflation is a silent killer in retirement plans, but a lot of people just kind of look at maybe houses and food and gas. But like we talked in a previous podcast, your insurance is going up, the maintenance stuff is going up, all the other things that go into, your expenses in retirement. And we got to remember, it's 25 years, it's 25, 30 years that you have to live off this money. And I don't think a lot of people can really picture that in their mind. They just think retirement. I can see 5, 10 years down the road. I've got money. I think it's great. But inflation, I think, what are we at? A little over 3% now. That your costs can double in a little over 20 years.
When you start,
just at that.
When you start doing those financial plans and actually giving them in future dollars, you say, oh, that can't be. But I now this is, every year I use this is getting a longer and longer ago. But the first car I ever owned was about $3,300, and it was a Chevy Laguna Super Sport. It was a great car. It had swivel seats.
Those.
It was white with red pinstripes and great. This is a great car. But today, that same car would cost somewhere in the area of $45,000 or $50,000. Okay, so that is however many times in the last 40 or 50 years. And that's what you're doing when you're talking about future dollars.
Right.
Everything costs more. And the higher the inflation number, the more it costs. So if you're not keeping up with that inflation, then you're sunk.
Yes.
So we have a client that we've been working with, and the wife was about to phase into retirement. We looked at the numbers. We did the retirement financial plan. And they had a plan that would work, but it would work even better if she worked one more year. And so we had those conversations, and when we laid out the different scenarios and we looked at the numbers and what's the impact, she decided, she's like, you know what, I'm going to work another year. Like, it's just one of those things. I think the idea of retirement, and, everybody wants to retire, but the reality is, okay, what is the financial picture? And then things change over time too. So you want to make sure you have a plan that's solid, but working that extra year was a game changer for them.
And not only that, but she was really concerned about long-term care and wanting to stay in their house and have a caregiver come in and live with them. And they had, I guess, an ADU or an accessory dwelling unit, which they're renting out right now. And their idea was, okay, we're going to bring in a caregiver to live in that, but we won't have that rental income then. And what does long-term care coverage cost if we start planning for that right now? So, you definitely have to factor that in, because the Administration for Community Living stated that in a recent study that 70% of individuals turning 65 in the U.S. will need at least some sort of long-term care coverage during their lifetime. So I thought that was a really high percentage.
It really is. And, they're thinking, which kind of reminds me that you need to start planning early. I know we've talked about this in another video in this series that we've done about financial retirement mistakes, but you really need to start early. And there's a few things you can do to try to avoid underestimation. One is to do a comprehensive plan. And again, you start that early enough, you'll probably be okay. So it means you probably should hire a financial planner. You probably should hire a tax person, an estate planner. You need all these people, or most people do, that have some money in their portfolios. The other thing you do, regularly review what you have. The next thing is have diversified income sources. So you don't want it just from one place, because that can dry up. You never know. So you want investments. Hopefully you have some pensions, Social Security. Maybe you need to do some part-time work. Who knows? Healthcare planning. That's the other thing you talked about. It's a big deal right now.
Big deal.
Although I would like to think that with all the AI that's coming out now, and that's artificial intelligence, that some of the things that heretofore were not curable will be curable, because it's going to advance the timeline of which that'll happen. But nevertheless, we are living in what we're living in. So healthcare costs are going to go up. You might consider long-term care insurance, et cetera. And then an inflation adjustment, which I know when Catherine and Greg, when you do the financial plans, you always put an inflation adjustment in there, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, we like to factor inflation, and then depending on kind of the returns or the allocation, we may do other adjustments in the allocations.
What number are you using in your plans?
So 3% as for inflation. Historically, that's a good number. It could be a little less, but after seeing inflation go up to 8%, and then so I think 3% is a safe place to start.
I would agree.
Over time.
Yeah.
Over time.
And then the other thing, as we're talking about financial planning, retirement plans, yes, it's important to have it in place, but the reality is also, if you're in retirement, it's important to revisit and make sure, do I still have enough? And there might be changes. We've had clients that now all of a sudden, they have enough to live on for the rest of their lives, but now they're caregiving and helping with their kids and grandkids. And so that changes the whole dynamic of the plan if you need more income or money from your investments. And what does that impact overall if you can continue on that path? So it's not, yes, it's having a plan, but along the way, if you're making changes, we need to make sure we're looking at that. And, if that's still the case that you want to help family, because obviously, a lot of people want to caregive for their kids and their adult kids. And, well, what's the impact to you? And do you still have enough for yourself?
I think that you're always taught to have an emergency savings, right? 6 months living expenses or something to that effect as you're going through your working years and accumulating your assets. It's in retirement, again, because it's so long, you need to have an emergency bucket that can handle an emergency of severe illness, a grandchild, a child that needs some help. I have a lot of clients that end up going, I need, hundreds of thousands of dollars for what? I got to buy him a house, or you just never know. So you need to have that built into the plan, because if you don't, something will probably happen.
There's another thing too we see a lot of, and that is parents really want to help their children.
They do.
Okay, and I get it. I want to help my kids too, and I think sometimes we have to kind of jolt clients into saying, okay, I know you want to help your children, but if you do this, you won't have enough. And there's a lot of people that just can't seem to say, well, I know, but they need my help. Well, who's going to help you? So especially because life expectancies are much longer than they were 50 years ago. Now, it's my understanding that it's come back down slightly, but I, again, have the feeling that with AI, it's going to rise again. And it may rise significantly. If we go from, I don't know what the average is, but let's say it's 82. I don't know what the figure is. But let's say it's 82 now. It would not surprise me to go to 92 or 95 as an average, which means people might be living to 110. All right, and you retired at 60.
Yeah.
Okay, that means your assets better last you for a long time. And it's funny too. I get this a lot. Sometimes for an older person, I'll say they're in their 80s. We'll take out a bond that's a 5-year bond. And I get, well, I might not live 5 years. And I said, so you mean if I get you a 2-year bond, you guarantee me that you're going to live for 2 more years? So of course not. Yeah. So you invest as if you're going to be alive, because if you're dead, truthfully, it doesn't matter.
That's true.
So make sure you adjust for life expectancy, because more than likely you're going to live a long time, and we hope that you all live happy and healthy and long lives.
Please stay tuned for important regulatory disclosures. The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or on any specific security. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. Any past performance discussed during this program is no guarantee of future results. Any indices referenced for comparison are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly. As always, please remember investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Please seek advice from a licensed professional. Wolff Magaña, LLC, doing business as WWM Financial, Savvy Doc Financial Planners, and Savvy Woman Wealth Management, is a registered investment advisor with the SEC.